Hello. All right. All right. Hey, everybody. Anybody need any more time on the very hard quiz? No? We're all set? All right. Awesome. Thank you all for being here on time. We got to be able to roll with it. The Capital Factory, things are always changing. So we were going to be we're normally on the 8th floor, but we're down here this morning because the Army needed to do something else up there, and this floor was open. This is great. I like it down here. It's just that we can't get this room every week. So we get to be down here. This is Voltron. This class is going to be a little bit more like normal class, but we're still not quite to like our normal rhythm yet, because this is still one of the first classes. And you can see we've actually got quite a few of these are all updated on the syllabus online as well. But we've got quite a few of the upcoming speakers that are up there. We've got almost all of them filled in. But it's going to be a great lineup for the semester. I'm super excited about it. A lot of both some key people that I know are great speakers because I've had them come speak before, like Chris Himes, who's the CEO of Indeed, or Bob Metcalf, who helped me start this class, the inventor of Ethernet. Jason Cohen, the founder of WP Engine. Those are all really good ones. Ash knows all those, especially Jason too. And then some new ones too. Some people that have not been here before, and people that are flying in just for this. They're flying in from around the country, just to come speak at this. Some really, really great entrepreneurs. So I'm really excited about that. You should go. For each of them, you'll get to do a little homework like you did for this, of just kind of learning more about them and what they've been working on. And I think as you look up these people, you're going to find to be really excited. But today we get Ash. And Ash holds the unique distinction of being the only person in Longhorn startup history to have spoken at every single Longhorn startup class we've ever had, and to usually be the first speaker. And back when Capital Factory had classes that we made you take when you joined Capital Factory, when it doesn't quite work that way anymore, he was also the first speaker at every one of those back since 2009. So that says something, at least, that I obviously really respect him and think that he has something important to say. And that's because there's lots of different approaches and ways to do a startup, and there's lots of different ways to the top. But he has a really systematic, thoughtful way of thinking about how you approach a startup and your business, and figuring out what your business is and what's a good business that is particularly applicable to a lot of the students that I meet that are trying to build businesses. So that's why I think he's someone that's always been here, and that's something called came out of something called Lean Startup. And Ash is a world expert on this. He literally wrote the book. There's a few books, but not many, and one of them is the book that's one of the required books for you to read for this, Running Lean, for the class. And people pay him to fly all around the world. He was telling me he just got back from Japan to go talk about this and teach about it and help people be better at it. And so we're really lucky to have him come and spend his time with us here. So thank you, Ash, for doing that. So we'll get to Ash in just a minute. What else we got for slides here? Pitch pieces. This will start September 12th, so not next week, which next week I'll be talking and I'll be telling my story. So we've got one more week to prepare, but September 12th we'll start doing open pitches at the beginning of class. And for each of those, that means there'll be room for usually anywhere from 8 to 10 people to get up and give a really quick elevator pitch for their startup, their business, what they're working on. And it's really fun, and then we give you really quick feedback, and one of the people who pitches gets $100. So it's a pretty good deal. So really encourage you all to consider thinking about coming up and pitching. If you have business ideas that you're thinking about working on and you want to get feedback on, that's a great way to do it. If you're already working on something and you want to get the word out about it, then coming up here, you get to tell everybody in the class about it and me about it, whoever the guest speaker is, and other people like that. So there's a lot of good reasons to come, and also just practice. It's really good to practice giving your pitch and getting up here, because as we all saw 2 weeks ago, when everybody had to get up and introduce themselves, that's something about practice too, and it's good to get practice getting up in front of everyone. All right, class communication stuff is all pretty standard, coming through Canvas, seems to be working. Class rules, again, really, my main goal is getting as many UT students in here as possible. So it's not for other guests. It's not to bring your parents or to bring a friend from some other startup, but if there are other UT students, you can invite them to come join as well. You have to be registered and take the quiz to get credit, which is it's pass-fail at the end. So it's really about attendance, and the quiz is the main way that we make sure that you attended and that you were here. We answer questions from the front to the back. There's a little incentive for sitting in the front. So if you ask when it's time to ask questions and you raise your hands, we start at the front and go to the back. And I ask that the class we're here till 6. So I would be surprised if this sometimes ends a little a few minutes early. But please don't get up and walk out in the middle of class. It's disrespectful to the guests that we have here that are spent their time to come here. No secrets. We're not here, especially when you're up here pitching. That's part of it too. Like, don't get up here and say anything really secret because you're saying it to a whole bunch of people. So just obviously, if you can politely ask people to keep things in confidence, or to say, hey, I'm practicing this out. Don't share it. But understand that everything we're doing here is meant to be shared in general. Some people might post about it on social media or things like that, and that's fine. It's okay to post things that the speakers say on social media or things like that too. All right, so last week was John Carmack. Were you able to see that from here and watch it? Kind of? It didn't really work? Oh, bummer. Well, that sucks. Oh, bummer. It's somewhat audible?
Yeah, there's a
Oh, man. I'm really sorry to hear that. Sorry, audio is really the most important part of it. It's way more important that you have good audio than good video. So I wish we had tested that better. I'm sorry. But it was really good. He was really awesome. It was a really good talk. And so I don't know if we have any other recording of it that we might be able to share. I don't think we do. But I'm bummed that you missed that. I'm sorry that didn't work out. I was really hoping that would have been a good one for you. So at least you got free pizza. But all the rest of them are going to be here in person, so we won't have that problem again. So as you know, for the class, we have 2 books that you are assigned to read. One of them is Running Lean, which is Ash's book. The other one is Startup Success, which is Gordon Doherty's book. Gordon is one of the co-founders of Capital Factory, and both really different books, but really helpful and really instructional on really specifically things to do and how to do it. And before this class, you were asked to read The Artist and the Innovator, which is a blog post or online post from Ash. That kind of gives you a little bit of the overview of Running Lean for this, you don't have to have read the whole book. But today we get Ash to come and tell you a little bit more about it, and to kind of hear from him in person for time for you to ask, obviously for you to ask questions. And then one of the best things to do with this is to be able to put up the Lean Canvas itself. And for that, I believe Matt said that some of you have brought some. We have some that you submitted, which is great. I really appreciate. And so, what better chance than to be able to put your Lean Canvas up and talk about it with Ash, and he can ask you questions about it, or talk about what might make it better, and literally get to go over it with the world expert. So, with that, we'd love to welcome Ash up here. And
Thanks for the intro, Josh. But as you were speaking, I just was going through my head that at the end of the day, we're both old. We've been doing this way too long. Yeah. At the same time, a lot of the stuff we're talking about is relatively timeless. a number of you, I guess all of you went through the artist and the innovator and you just did the quiz. I'd love to hear from you what your thoughts were. What were some of the takeaways from the story? Anyone? Yeah.
I find it really interesting how like traction, like, you know, hey, a professor's using the software, oh, it was written about in the Daily Texan, like that is a lot more valuable than, you know, paying customers like ARR or something like that. Like just people using it even for free, like that's just so valuable.
Okay. Well, that's interesting. So of course it depends on your business model. Sometimes money is more valuable than users who would never pay you. But definitely if you're building a multi-sided model that compounds and scales with interest and that side of it, absolutely. Yeah.
I found it interesting from the perspective of a founder because my company kind of followed that track at first of, all right, how do we build a perfect product? And without knowing, we did naturally shift to the more innovator side. But I was just interesting how that was like put into concrete terms.
And full confession, I was a Steve, and over years, in many products, I started to act more like Larry. So basically, and I'll maybe even go to the first slide here. But one of the punchlines is skill sets are important. You all have to get good at building products, but the world we're living in has changed. And so a lot of what the story was about is just building a great product today is not important because when you have an idea here in Austin, Texas, so do 10, 20, 30 other people around the world. And so there's a lot more, when the time for an idea comes, there's going to be lots of people starting to think much the same way and starting to build products and do things the same way. And so this is a mindset of reprioritizing what you think is riskiest or important at the early stages of an idea and embracing that. So again, as I said, I built many products and I was in that transition phase where products were going from being very hard to build to being easier to build, and there's just a new playbook to succeed at that. Anyone else? Yes?
I think it's helped me also as a kind of founder, and I was thinking like what he had said. I never really thought about it that way, and I kind of realized something. I'd spent a lot of time working on kind of the building approach, and definitely, especially with like the subset of people that I'm working with, I want to form bigger connections with them, and I want to be able to relate to them.
And these are people as in co-founders or also customers?
Customers and like the overall population, because I'm targeting like small towns, rural people, and for them commuting is very important.
Okay, very good. Anyone else? Yes, back there.
Well, a long time ago I tried to be an Amazon seller, and I thought that this like made a lot of sense in that context because like on Amazon it's not about coming up with like the next best new product you think they're gonna want. It's like finding a niche, even if it's the most random thing and you don't want to build it, just like whatever is not available that customers want.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and so a big part of this is trying to get to a point where you can understand or predict what customers want. And ironically, Amazon's very good at that. And they've got all kinds of algorithms and things to get to that. But that's essentially, yes, what you said at the end is very critical. Is if you can start to understand customers better in terms of where they're struggling, where their problems are, where their pains are, you begin to start imagining what could be a better future of those customers.
It was interesting to read how your story seemed to put less emphasis on the role with a technical founder, which is something a lot of like accelerators like YC like really pushes for, and how like it was emphasizing like the idea and the getting people interested was more considered important.
And maybe I'll talk to that. So I'm a technical founder, and part of the bias there is that if there are technical founders in the room, we spend a lot of waking hours trying to focus more on can we build something, when today the question is should we build this thing? Should we invest time, money, effort doing this one thing? And so for me that was again a wake-up call of if I go back to the title slide, I'll just leave it, but life's too short to build something nobody wants. And so having built lots of products that seem technically sound, seem right for what I thought people wanted, and then realizing that the market wasn't ready or I was too early, that's really what this is about. So it's not so much a a knock on the product being or solution being important, but recognizing that the business model is the real product, and the solution is an important part of it, but it is one part of the jigsaw puzzle. You have to make all the pieces fit. Yes, go ahead.
This might have been touched on, but I just thought it was interesting that you don't need like a physical product to prove traction. You just need to be able to give a compelling offer to the customers, and if they respond, then you know you can go more in that direction. And I think I'm always thinking, okay, yeah, we need to understand the problem, we need to get like validation from the customers, but that means I need to go make a product and give it to them and see if they want it. But you don't necessarily have to do that.
Yeah. So actually with that, I'll move a little bit forward. So what you're seeing here are just some of the old world versus new world differences. So we've come from a time where things were harder to build, not a lot of competitors. We had fewer choices customers had fewer choices on products. And so if you build a product, you could really work with them to iterate and refine from there. Fast forward today, everything I talked about. So really what I want to touch on was one of the mindsets that is key is this idea of build, demo, sell versus demo, sell, build. And I heard this from mutual friends of ours, BJoy, who Josh knows.
I texted him yesterday. I haven't heard back yet. I just was like, BJoy, I haven't heard from you.
I don't even know what
part was it?
Yeah. But it's a very simple kind of concept, but going back to this idea of the traditional approach is we've got to build something first to make sure it works. Then we go and demo it to our customers. But if you actually pause for a second and realize that the demo doesn't have to work. The customer never pulls out the screwdriver or tries to figure out, is this product really working the way it is. Even today, Apple announced the iPhone 15. All they showed you was a video. That could have been doctored up. Like everything they showed you there could have been done with all the tech we have. You can just make believe. So what we buy is not so much a working product, but a promise of better. We buy a promise of what could be possible, and that's what the demo is about. And so when you flip the order around, instead of building something to its completion, what if you could instead go and sell the demo? So that's the whole demo, sell, build. So sell the demo. If it doesn't sell, why even build the product to begin with? Anyone else want to add? Yes, go ahead.
I just had a question on on the last question of the quiz, they talked about how
He didn't see the quiz.
okay. So basically, it was you were talking about the business model is more important than the solution, right? And from what I understand, Y Combinator startup school, they really preach solution, solution, solution. And I actually got that question wrong because could you explain more why the business model is more important than the solution to the customer's problem?
Yeah. So solution to the customer's problem is slightly different, and so when I bring up the canvas, we can maybe address that more concretely. But I'll maybe just answer it more generically. Is too often as founders we see a problem and then we jump to a solution. And if you look statistically speaking, the 4 solutions, 2/3 of them don't really work. There's the PayPals and the Groupons of the world where the first solution doesn't really work, and you have to then go through an iterative process to figure out what does indeed work. So there's that aspect of it. And then the other aspect is the whole notion of solutions are, in some ways, as I said, when the time for an idea comes, everyone is kind of pitching the same thing. Just look at the AI space. There's lots of people, every startup in the world has an AI story. But in 2 years, there are going to be some true winners. And those are the ones who are going to use this new macro event of AI becoming accessible, and they're going to solve some real customer problems. So what you just said is that solution by itself is not enough, but if you are starting to solve a customer problem with a solution, that has more weight. And then the question is, how do you know that customers have those problems? Like, have you gone and talked to them? Have you gone and done discovery or validation? And if the answer is no, then that could still be a guess, which would get you stuck. But if you have done the validation, then by all means go forward. So in YC, they do, I'll say, worship the kind of tech side of things, and that's just been Hacker News and the whole brand that they have. And so they want people to tinker, but the moment you get into one of their programs, the first or second question they will immediately ask you is the so what question. So what does your product really do for your customer, and how do you know that to be true? So have you gone and talked to them? Have you done all the validation that we talked about? So even the Airbnb founders, when they got into YC, they had this early traction, they were doing kind of okay, but then they got stuck. They couldn't grow Airbnb, and the advice that Paul Graham gave them is go and talk to your hosts and understand what their problems are. Go and talk to your guests and understand where they're struggling, and that's what led to the insights that created some of the inflection points in that story.
So when you're talking about old world versus new world mindsets, the new world mindsets, at least to me, it seems super risky and scary to partake in as a business owner, because I'm demoing something to the public and then selling it to them with no promise that it's actually going to do what I say it's going to do. So if I cannot deliver on my promises, it seems like it would be very risky for future investments. Like, is there a way to go about mitigating that kind of risk?
Yeah, so this is exactly why, for those of you that are not product oriented or tech, you want to have some of those folks on your team, or at least have advisors on the team, to make sure that what you tell your customer is indeed possible within a near distant future. Right? So we don't want to go and promise vaporware. We want to go and promise things, that idea for a product, and they have some validation, maybe they've got some requirements, they'll go design it, build it, and then put it to market validation. We're just switching some of the orders around. So we still have to make sure the problem exists. We have to make sure it's buildable. We still have to design it, but then we don't finish building it. We then go out and start pitching our design. That's the whole idea of the demo. So the demo is buildable, and you want to make sure you can do it. So when I work with, for example, I work with a lot of deep tech teams that are inventing stuff in the lab. Whether it's on a university campus or it's in a big company, they're inventing stuff in the lab, and they don't quite know when this will be ready for prime time. And so there's a certain point when that switches to where what they have done in the lab is feasible. And that's one of the risks we'll talk about today. And at that point, it makes sense to go out and start testing what the market is, who the customers are, because you know you can build this. The question really is, do people want this, and what will be the value proposition of it? So hopefully that addresses your question. We're not going in there trying to just say, customers, what do you want? And if you want to fly, and even Mars, you can think of it, people are selling tickets to Mars, but let's say Jupiter or Saturn. If you go and just promise people we are going to leave the galaxy and do all these things, and it's completely all made up, that's not what the whole demo cell build process is about.
On that note, Ash, so is there overlap between the sell and build phase?
Is there overlap between the sell and the build? Yes. So when we look at the process, I can maybe pull up a slide at the very end. From the moment you start getting commitments from your customers, there is a finite, so we are baking in some time. So I talked about technical feasibility. From the moment you make a promise where a customer says, I love what you have to offer, I would like to be your customer, you ideally want to shrink that time between when they say yes and when you can deliver them that first, we call, in the lead startup world, we call it that minimum viable product, but when you can deliver release 1.0 to them. And so there is an overlap there where you are first starting with sales and getting commitments, and then you are building the product while you're getting more customers in order to then deliver it. So there is an overlap for sure.
When is the MVP coming?
So that I guess when we get to the end, I'll actually kind of show the full roadmap. And so again, the whole idea of and I'll just maybe leave it here at a high level of what you want to start with there is a phase where you're using a lean canvas. We'll talk about that here in a second. So you are ideating, you're getting your concepts down on paper in terms of what you're trying to do. There's then a discovery, a problem understanding phase. There's a pitching phase, and when you get commitments, that's when you start building the MVP. So I'll show a final slide at the end just to kind of put that into perspective. So let's kind of move things forward, since I think all of you have actually read the post and gotten good takeaways from it. So in the new world we're living in, speed is important, just for the reasons I described. When time for an idea comes, there's not going to be one or two potential competitors. There's going to be lots of people exploring the space. And so we want to move fast, and speed here is relative. So some of you who are building physical products, there's a different cadence than when you're building digital products. If you were doing anything in pharmaceuticals or like biosciences or that, there's going to be different speeds. But the point is, if you can outlearn your competition, if you can understand what they want before your competitors and deliver what they want, that's what gets you the unfair advantage. That's what gets you talking to them. And in this framework, talking to customers is a key skill, because that's where you learn what future problems is that you're going to be solving. Now, when you're moving really fast, so this is where we'll talk about the lean canvas. The old world tool for this was building static plans, doing a lot of analysis. This is where the business planning, business use casing came in. I'm guessing not a lot of you have written business plans. I've ever only written one, and then kind of moved on to more business modeling myself. But the idea of the business model is very much about taking your ideas and distilling it down on this one-page canvas. And I know we have some few canvases here that we'll get to reviewing. We'll talk about what the canvas boxes are here in this next few sections. But the idea of the one-page lean canvas is to take an initial first stab of what you think that jigsaw puzzle looks like. So who are your customers? What are the problems? How do you make money? You know, all of the things that you normally would write in a traditional business plan, we want to put down on a single page, because we don't want to spend a lot of time, because a lot of this is still unfounded and you can say guesses or hypotheses if you want to be fancy. The next step in the process is identifying what's riskiest in those assumptions. So in some products, there's going to be lots of technical risk. So again, if you're trying to do something that's never been done before, because the tech is very, very nascent, in those cases, maybe there's a lot of technical risk, and that's what you prioritize first. In most markets, though, we find that it tends to be more market or customer risk. And so this is this mindset of prioritizing what's riskiest, not what's easiest in the model. And those of you that are product-oriented already, or are technical or build complex things, you know that if you're building anything complex, we don't want to start with the easy stuff, we want to start with the harder stuff. And so again, if product development has become easier, the harder stuff is marketing, sales, and that's really what we want to start with. And so that's what this mindset is about. Now, when we think of risks, we can think of customer risks, market risks, product risks. This is a nice lens to use when you are looking at the canvas. So when we think of desirability, we're trying to understand what is it that customers want, like what is it that appeals to them. When we think of viability, these are all the business model economics questions. How do we make money? Do we make profit? Do we scale? Do we grow? And then when we think of feasibility, those are all the solution-centric or distribution-centric kind of things that come in. So what would you say when you were starting out are some of the riskier assumptions from the customer standpoint? Anyone? From when a customer looks at an idea, what do they see?
Desirability.
Yeah, so it's going to be desirability. And you can kind of prove this to yourself, as if you're in the market to buy anything. If you're in the market to buy a new car, for instance, you don't just wake up one day and say, I want a new car. There's going to be a series of events that prompt that. Right? And then when you say you want a new car, you don't just go and randomly test drive a bunch of cars. You're going to then think about what your budget is, what the needs are, what your requirements are. So when customers look at this, it starts with, do I need something or want something to begin with? There needs to be some kind of trigger that prompts them to say, I need a new car, so that's desirability. Then there's viability, which is how much car can I afford? And you're not going to buy sports cars, you're probably going to buy something more modest, even though you're in college. I was in college not that long ago. So that's where the viability bit comes in. And then finally, you've got the feasibility. Does the car work? Does it have features and things that you want? Now, funny enough, when we, as founders, look at this, we tend to look at this in reverse. We kind of gloss over desirability that, yeah, there's a problem, but we don't go deep enough. We think about viability as, sure, people will pay for this eventually, let's first build. Right? So that's what we're trying to shift here with the artist and innovator story, is that you want to see your ideas from the lens of how a customer might see it. So communicate desirability first, then viability, then feasibility. So when we look at desirability on the lean canvas, anyone want to maybe guess at what boxes might contribute to desirability? Yes?
Early adopters.
So early adopters, sure. Your customer segment box is one of them, like that whole section. So who's it for? Anything else?
UDP.
Yeah, your value proposition, and specifically your unique value proposition. So what's different about your product? And I'll kind of take those two. So if you know who's it for and you know what you're promising them, in order to promise them something, it helps to understand their problems. So that's actually, these three boxes help you in crafting a good desirability story. If you can go to a customer and nail a problem, that's a form of unique value proposition. Like it's say, you can hang a painting without having to drill a hole. I think all of you know the product I'm thinking about, 3M command strip. That is, I'm highlighting a problem, I'm not even naming the product, and you know that's compelling. So that's a unique value proposition. Other times you promise a better outcome. Like I can help you make more money, or I can help you save more money. So there are different ways of crafting the UDP, but typically these boxes use them. What about viability? The obvious box here is, yes? Key metrics is one of them. Anyone else? Yes?
Revenue and cost.
Yeah, revenue and cost. So cost definitely is a part of viability, because the distance between revenue and cost creates profit. But when we are first starting out, definitely revenue. So have you built something that, so we want to find problems, but we want to find problems that are monetizable. In other words, is time, money, and effort being spent? And so even when you're doing your research, it's helpful to think about how are people doing this today. So if you have a new product idea and the solutions that people are currently using are free, that's a bit of a challenge. Doesn't mean you can't make them spend more money, but if they're currently not spending any money, understanding that is helpful. So that's where kind of revenue stream comes in. Is you have not only a problem, but you have a monetizable problem. Key metrics is a big part of it. I also put unfair advantage in there, simply because at scale, anything worth copying will be copied. So you don't have to worry about that at the outset of a project, which is why if you've gone through some of the Lean Canvas videos, it's okay to leave this box blank in the beginning, as long as you are thinking about filling it in the not so distant future. So even Mark Zuckerberg, when he started Facebook on a single campus, didn't really have an unfair advantage. He wasn't creating the first social network. He didn't have huge viral effects day one, but he had the beginnings of a story. So you could kind of weave that into a more compelling unfair advantage story. And then on feasibility, I'll just bring out all the boxes. So we'll talk about these three boxes. So definitely the solution comes into feasibility. And so going back to the question that was asked back in the corner there, when we are doing the demo cell build process, we do want to look at our ideas with the feasibility lens to make sure that whatever solutions we're putting on the Lean Canvas are buildable. Like it doesn't have to be built, but they're buildable. Same thing on channels. Depending on the scope of your idea, if you're trying to build something that's going to grow to millions of users, you have to make sure that your channels are potentially going to be scalable. That they have to get to millions of users, you will need some kind of a viral loop that has to work. So thinking along those lines can even be something that you set yourself up from the early days. You don't have to have a viral engine, but knowing that you have to build one, prioritize that in your marketing and sales. And then finally, I put cost structure here simply because cost structure is runway. So as we're building a product, we have to constantly balance how much time, money, and effort we spend on the solution and how much revenue we're making, and so balancing those two is why cost structure is here on the feasibility side. So kind of to wrap this up, and then we'll open up for questions and or the Lean Canvas reviews. This is what the process looks like. So we started with a model, a very simple model like the Lean Canvas. We identified what's riskiest. The next step here is to take those risky assumptions and start running experiments. The idea of the experiments is where you can run some smaller tests to test those riskiest assumptions. So if you were doing examples of those like pricing tests or interest tests and teaser pages, landing pages, and we can get tactical if folks have questions with your own ideas, but there are a whole library and recipes of tests that we now have where we can take ideas as complex as building an electric car, like Tesla did, to starting a new restaurant, and you can come up with faster ways to start testing some of these riskiest assumptions. And that's what the feedback loop would look like. So as you begin to run experiments, you're going to get data, you're going to get learning, and that fuels your understanding of risks. and this is a rinse and repeat process. So the more cycles you make through this build, prioritize, test loop, and you're making decisions with evidence, the higher your chances of building something that ultimately customers want. So I'm gonna pause here and see if there are any questions. Yes.
So from what I understand, you need to have a business model that allows you to have multiple solutions to a problem, because like, you don't know for sure if that solution is gonna work, and like, you know, you demo each solution out and do your research and test customers. But that's like the first part. Is that correct? Like your business model should support multiple solutions?
Well, it should be like, so I talk about late binding your solution. So it can be open-ended, like you could have no solution, or you could be open to multiple possibilities, and all that is perfectly fine. Because when we are first kind of building out the business model, we want to focus in on the desirability story. So do customers struggle today with getting a particular job done? Like, is there evidence of that? And if there's evidence of that, pretty much solutions start coming, pretty quickly. So if we just think of, any product for that matter, when we think of like Airbnb, when people are in a city where there are no hotel rooms, what do, right? So that's a thing that they observe, and so they then imagine a particular solution, and it may not have been the only solution, but you then start testing solutions to get to one that does.
Okay, so I wanna ask, like, with this, how, let's say for something big like augmented reality, right? That's a pretty big space. What would be some, what are some like demos and, what are some demos and possible, I guess like ideas, I don't know, just like what are some possible demos and ideas of like AR?
So when we think of ideas, there are many different places to start. What you're describing is a technology-centric idea. So you're fascinated by augmented reality, and so the question is, where can you apply it? And so this is where it helps to start a bit of brainstorming to see where are possible use cases, right? And then starting to sketch out canvases for those in more specific terms. So when I look at augmented reality, we can think of it being used in anything from like tourism, when people are coming here to visit Austin or wherever, they can use augmented reality for that use case. So there's always an old way and a new way. So how would they normally do this? They would have tour books and tour guides to guide them. Now they have augmented reality, which helps them kind of navigate the city on their own. If you were going on an art tour or a museum tour or a food tour of some sort, again, augmented reality can guide you along the way. And so part of that initial challenge with a solution looking for a business model is that there are many use cases, and you have to explore many of them to find which might be the most desirable, viable, and feasible. As opposed to the opposite could have happened, where you might be a tour operator, or you might have friends who are tour operators, and they say, it's like with COVID, for example, like with social distancing, people couldn't do a lot of these things, and you can imagine augmented reality filling that gap. And so that would be observing a problem and then saying, let me sketch out a canvas to see how we can get people who want to do tours or want to do, get that outcome, but we can do it with augmented reality. So hopefully that addresses it. But so ideation is kind of messy. We can't control where we start on the canvas. It depends on where you are starting. So if you're starting with, I want to do something with augmented reality, I would say you've got to brainstorm possible use cases, and then think of customers and problems, and then fill out the rest of the canvas. And if you are starting with a problem that augmented reality can be a solution for, then focus on the customers and their problems, and then fill out the canvas. Yes?
What are some of the biggest pitfalls that you see entrepreneurs make, even those that might be innovators rather than others?
Yeah, so the biggest pitfall is the one that's kind of outlined in the story, which is, even though the world has changed, for a lot of us product people, we tend to overvalue technical risk. And so we tend to want to build things before we engage customers. Even when I work with inventors who are doing this in the labs, as I described early on, many times they want to get it to be fully working and fully commercializable before they ever set out. And oftentimes that's too late in the story. By that time, usually someone else is doing something with the technology already. So I would say that's one of the biggest challenges, which is shifting your mindset from trying to get the solution perfect to being comfortable with, as we were describing, going out and selling before you build. It sounds very uncomfortable and risky, but more often than not, you want to go faster than your customers. Your customers don't have that sense of urgency. Even when you have good ideas that we now take for granted, there's a huge multi-year adoption curve because not everyone jumps on board. Okay, any other final questions? If not, I'm going to just put the slide I was talking about here. So this in many ways is the high level roadmap of what the process looks like. So you're starting out with clean canvases, but eventually you're going and trying to understand who your customers are, so you're understanding their problems. You're then starting to design solutions and then craft an offer. So when we talked about the offer testing process early on, the distance between crafting an offer and then actually building your product are two separate events. They're two discrete events. When you go and pitch your product, getting people to say, yes, I want to buy, making it more tangible as in take my money, which is pre-orders like on a Kickstarter type campaign, a crowdfunding campaign, or even in the pitch getting advance orders. That's what we are looking for before we go and spend a lot of time, money, effort fully building out a particular product. And even these first three steps can be done, as I said early on, across many different domains. It doesn't have to just be B2C. Even in B2B domains, you can go and make a $100,000 product sale just with a PowerPoint presentation. So that's the whole demo sell build kind of approach. Yes?
I was just wondering what your recommendations are for engaging your customers and getting to hear their problems better besides just talking with friends and family. What are the ways that you most commonly see entrepreneurs approach that?
Yeah, so starting with friends and families is a good first step because they're easier for people to reach. The problem with friends and family is that many times they are biased. They may either try to talk you out of your idea or talk you into your idea, so they're depending on how supportive. So I usually will start with them. First, the way we interview is a bit different, but I'll get to that second. But start with your friends and family, but start asking for referrals to other people out. So tell them you want to talk to more people just like them who have the same problem. Can they refer you to other people? And pretty soon you're talking to strangers. And that is where you get, in some ways, the best kind of stories with which to validate or invalidate what you're trying to do. But the other thing I'll also say is that the way we run our interviews, even when you're talking to friends and families, is we're not looking for opinions like, do you think this idea is good or bad, or tell me what problems you have. We're really trying to understand the story of the struggle. So if I were, for example, interviewing around Uber, I wouldn't go and ask people what are the problems with taxis, because what I might hear are things like taxi drivers are rude, taxis are not all that clean, and I might take that and say, let me go and build cleaner taxis, right? So I don't come up with the idea of Uber. What we want to do instead in those scenarios, when you're talking to your friends, is ask them to describe the last time they ordered a taxi when they were trying to catch a flight at 6 a.m. in the morning, and what are the steps they went through. And when they start talking about having to order, and many of you were probably not alive when we had to order taxis from a taxi company, but they probably had to order the taxi in advance. They were double confirmed and triple confirmed. When the taxi was late, they start getting nervous, am I going to catch my flight? Right? So that would be how we run these interviews, is not so much asking our friends even what they think of our idea or will they buy what we're building, but rather understand how they are currently doing the job or the thing that you are going to be doing, the use case you're going to be addressing, and are they struggling with that? That's what we're aiming to get. And usually when you even talk to your friends, it could be as simple as how do you buy clothes, and you get a whole long 30-minute conversation, and that's where you look for problems we're solving. Like how, did they buy 10 things and return 9 and only keep 1? What if we could solve that problem? Okay, so this may be a good transition point to get some lean canvases on if you want to make the switch. And while we're doing that, so the idea of the lean canvases, it would be great to see some of the ideas that you're working on. I know they're early stage, so we're not here to I'm not here to judge them and tell you, this is no good or will not work. We're here to just have a constructive conversation. So I want to see what you're trying to do, and we'll talk about what you've done so far, what are next steps. So whoever is going to come out here and talk about their lean canvas, a quick 2-3 minute overview would be helpful in describing what you're trying to achieve, and then any backstory of what you've done so far in terms of validating will be super helpful, and then we'll just take it a step forward, applying those 3 steps, which is what might be riskiest, what could be some faster ways to test what you're aiming to do. So I see the first lean canvas here.
So I guess, now, did you just put them in order of what you got?
Yes.
Okay,
Well, they're kind of random.
so these ones that they submitted. Okay, awesome. So I guess we got a whole bunch that were submitted, and we'll just kind of pop them
Okay,
up.
sure.
So you might want to ask whose it is. And
Yeah, so German railway earned employees feel, whose is that? So yeah, why did you, is there a second mic over here? And so again, it's not a pitch, we're just trying to understand what it is that we're trying to do, and then we'll talk about it. So what might help is just hearing you talk about where the idea came from. So what's the origin story of the idea? What did you either observe as a problem, or like, where did this come from? And what have you done so far?
Yes, sure. Oh my God. Alright, so my name is Lauren. I'm from Berlin, so this is kind of a situation in Germany. But I thought it's something I could also take as a lean canvas solution and problem. So yeah, the background of it is, during an interview, okay, let me start with the problem. So I used to work in a company called German Railway. It's transportation, basically the basic transportation company in Germany. And so during interviews with employees and the German Railway, I learned that the employees feel they have little opportunity to make contacts or build networks out of their own working location. And many would, and actually people are like the employees, co-workers would express how they enjoy or how they would enjoy working at other company locations, even if it is for a limited time. The issue is that they don't want to relocate entirely or change their specific position, but just want to experience how other working locations are networking and everything. So it is more of like an HR problem and location problem that I see, because it's like more of an administrative task. Even if the managers would like to provide a solution for this, it's like a huge company, 500 plus people. So that's kind of the problem. And the solution would be like a subscription-based platform that allows employees to work in another office location for a short period of time, and leveraging the decentralization of companies and enable employees to rotate locations so that they can acquire new skills and build strong networks well beyond their own work location. I thought of like kind of like a platform where it's two-sided. One side for the HR executive or the CEO, and the other side for the employees, and which would allow them to also see other on-site offices. So that's kind of like, yeah, rotation. How is an employee able to easily, with less administrative effort, able to kind of go to other offices? And so the customer segment, or okay, it's a B2B oriented company definitely, and what else?
I guess I can ask, maybe start asking some questions.
Yeah,
So,
sure.
So in the interviewing, what happens when the employees feel like they don't know if this doesn't happen, like what happens to their happiness level, or like are there consequences there?
Yes, surely. So it's more like a bubble. So for instance, they hear about how the work is in another city, but they're so tied up in their own location and their work that it's more of like, oh, I'd like to also maybe experience that kind of, in this case, like in the German railway, like different departments are in different cities. So it's just more of like, oh, I'd also like to learn and see how they do things.
Yeah. So I guess where I was going is that, like, is attrition a problem where people feel like I'm not, because I can get a diversity of experiences, maybe I want to leave this company and go do something else. So the reason I bring that up is that, to your point, like, this is definitely a multi-sided model. So when we think of products like this one, there's a user side, and then there's a decision maker or buyer side. So as you described, HR or CEOs are going to be the ones who are looking at some metric, which is, are our employees happy? Are they doing good work? Are they, all of those things, is attrition high or low as a result? So when you're modeling this canvas, it would be helpful to either create two separate models, one from a executive point of view, and then one from the employee point of view, and then describe problems on both sides. And so that's where, if you were, because I'm assuming that you're not going to make the employees pay for your product. I know there's a lot of blanks on the canvas still, because it's early, but you're not going to make them pay. It's going to probably be something that the company does on behalf to allow that kind of mobility. But you have to make a case for them, which is, if you don't do this, unhappiness goes down, people don't want to stay.
Yeah, definitely. I think the background of it is the war, the so-called war for talents, and it's like, how do you get employees? How do you, get them into your company when there's so many other benefits in other companies? So such a thing would actually help. So it's kind of like trying to advertise to the companies that are like maybe huge and conservative, to open up and try to take it as an incentive also to win new employees.
Sure.
Yeah.
So I guess my only feedback here is that definitely starting to think of this from both perspectives, and it goes for everyone. When you're looking at a multi-sided model, you have advertisers models where you have users and customers, and similarly when you have like a complex B2B type product, there are users and now buyers or decision makers. And so looking at the canvas or the questions from both perspectives. So why would an executive care? Like, what problem are they trying to solve? And so they're tasked with creating happy employees, making sure productivity is high, all of those kinds of things. And so if this is a cause for people losing that, that would be a problem they may potentially want to solve. And then similarly on the user side, understanding, which is the interview I think you did, understanding their perspective to see what they would like to do. And then, so that would be the first step, and then the bits here are going to be trying to, as you begin to build a version of this, so have you thought of like what the solution could be? Because this could be more of a, like, is there a product you have in mind, a solution you have in mind? Or?
Not really like a prototype, it's more like in my mind, but definitely like a platform, so it's kind of like a tech solution. Yeah.
Okay. So I know it's early stages, but you always want to ask, the existing alternative box is blank, And so today I look at, maybe they don't have this policy where you can relocate, but if you went and gave this idea to say a CEO, what prevents them from just creating a policy where employees can move around freely, right? So that becomes your competition. So you also want to think through, which is when you are raising this problem, the solution that if the solution is something that the company can implement themselves, then you may not be able to pitch them a tech platform. But you want to kind of think of like what's the value proposition? What can you do that they couldn't do on their own? Right? So that's where I would start thinking about solution, and then what the value proposition I think is easy, which is from an employee standpoint, you get to see more locations. From a decision maker standpoint, you get to get more happy employees. The solution bit is more a question of, is it something they can do on their own, or do they need you? And so you want to start thinking about that side of the story as well.
Yeah. I appreciate it. Thank you for the feedback.
Right. So there's a lot of fine print there, so we'll need some help. Let me see if I can. The UV key is a device will reduce the measuring and marking step while allowing electrodes to be placed. Anyone know that's your canvas?
I don't think he's here. I kind of have an idea, but like, let's see if go next one.
Yeah, and so he's not here, I don't want to pick on them, but what I would say is that with the lead canvas, it's not smaller fonts, but fewer words, right? So if you can get your idea across, ideally it should be scannable. If you were here with an investor, they couldn't read this, right? So you want to be a bit careful that you are not trying to write a whole document, but trying to use fewer words to get the concept across. Okay. Use AI and machine learning to scale financial research, detect anomaly detection. Here. Create a fruiting chamber that has enough space for a standard size operation.
Where's the mic? There. Yeah.
So again, just as before, a bit of backstory would be super helpful while we all stand.
Yeah, okay, so I will point out that this is kind of an old iteration of the canvas, but yeah, so in terms of backstory, when I joined college, during my freshman year, I had this project that I needed to do for a class, and I decided that I would use micro-restoration as like the foundation for that project, because I recently read Paul Stamets' book called Micro-Restoration, and it just opened my eyes to all of the possibilities for mushrooms to help our environments and our health. And so I started getting into mushrooms, and then also at the same time, lots of people around the world were also getting into mushrooms and starting to release content about them, and you guys may have noticed the huge uptick in interest for like functional mushrooms. So I got some of these fruiting blocks that you can buy online to grow mushrooms, right? And they kept failing because essentially the environment that they were growing in was incorrect. And looking for solutions online, there are videos with hundreds of thousands of views on YouTube about how to build your own fruiting chamber. And they're pretty difficult to build, and then the problem with them is that they require a lot of care. So like 3 to 4 times a day, you have to come open it, mist it, fan it, and that's just like, I had some friends who were also interested in growing mushrooms, and most of them ended up just not doing it in the end because that was too much of a strain on them. So I started looking around, and some alternatives have come out in the past 2 years or so, but they're all around the range of $500, which is just way beyond most people's price range for just a home hobby like this. And they have features that increase the price way beyond what you need for this kind of condition control setup. So essentially the solution that I'm working on right now is to have a small device that you can mount onto any rigid container that will control the humidity from just misting out of a water reservoir and the airflow. So it's simplified a lot since I created this canvas. Yeah, in terms of unfair advantage, that was one thing that I was confused about. I tried to fill it in, but obviously I'm just pointing out intellectual property. And then I feel like just my understanding of mushroom cultivation has equipped me better than a lot of the founders of these other companies, because I've had friends that have bought their products and they just don't seem to work very well. They just look really good, you know? So, any
Okay.
thoughts?
Yeah, so maybe I'll talk to your question first. So when we think of unfair advantage, with products like these ones, one of with physical products, you can oftentimes get away with patents for the future. So if there are copycats, you can infringe. But the challenge there is that you have to be in a position to detect infringement, and so you have to know what it is, of course, that you're patenting, and is it one to be, you know, is it something you patent to begin with, and then two, when people infringe, you have to have the resources to go infringe on them, which is why for those reasons, many people who are starting out may do more of a patent pending type of a step where you don't have to fully file for the patent, but then you focus more on trade secrets to get some initial traction, and then finish out the patent. So that might be something to kind of think about, just because the moment you file a patent officially, you're telling everyone how to do this, which means you're just inviting copycats to come and say, oh, thanks for giving us, you know, the how of how you're doing this. And then you also describe like YouTube, and this is where like when patent office said this, what you're describing is already described as a method somewhere else. That's where like the patentability comes in question. And again, there is just a convenience story here. Like if the, as you were describing, the old way is not as effective, there are people who are creating these more efficient ways of growing mushrooms, but it's not so easy to build, and you can build that at scale. And that's the automobile story, Henry Ford. Then by all means that becomes your unfair advantage, because you just can produce these and you become the de facto place to go for those kinds of devices. So then, again, the unfair advantage is important, but not the most important thing they want. It's about getting your customers to value first. If they can start growing mushrooms better than they would normally grow, then that's what I would focus on initially.
Yeah, okay. I also wanted to ask, like, how many surveys would you suggest administering before, like, starting to work on a prototype if they seem promising? Because I've already done maybe 150 or so, and of course there have been people who weren't interested, but then there have also been more people that I feel like gave positive feedback for this idea.
So surveys are effective if you know the space inside out. It seems like you've been spending a lot of time in the mushroom community and the mushroom space. So if you know what you want to validate, surveys are good because you can design a questionnaire and see do people fall into this bucket. I'm still a fan of more open-ended discovery. And I was actually going to ask you, like here I see from a customer segment, early adopter segment, you know, I see current middle to upper class cultivars and then culinary mushroom enthusiasts. I look at like two segments right there, and when I'm thinking of this, I'm trying to understand, and for each of them there may be different alternatives. Like if you are a culinary enthusiast, how are you growing mushrooms? So when we start thinking about these kinds of explorations, I would recommend finding people who are currently trying to grow mushrooms and just interviewing them and asking them what they're doing, rather than sending them a survey. The magic of the interview-based approach is that you only need 10 to 20 conversations where you start to see patterns already. Where you start to see that many of them have done the YouTube thing and they give up, or tried the other thing and they give up, and maybe you've done some of that. But those are more effective in the short term to get insights. People will go much deeper than just your survey questions.
Okay. I also wanted to ask, so I put psilocybin cultivation on here as well, because it looks like a promising field in the future. And actually, this past Thursday, California proposed a bill to decriminalize psilocybin mushrooms. So I'm just wondering, how would you go about evaluating like the market size of a market like that that does not necessarily exist like in the public eye yet?
So I guess I'll answer that question more generically. When we are looking for early adopters, we, like in this example, we don't want to find people who aren't growing mushrooms currently to get them starting to doing because you've come up with an easier way. Those are not necessarily your early adopters. A lot of people will say, if I could grow mushrooms in my house, I'll do it. But when the time comes, they don't have the discipline, they don't follow through. So you want to find people who are currently doing it already. And if they've tried to grow this variety of mushroom or type of mushroom they're describing and have failed, then this is where like the early adopter segmentation comes in. You want to understand which are the hardest mushrooms in the world to grow. And if you can make that growable in your house, that may be a good place to start, because people have tried and failed, as opposed to places, and that's where like, when we look at the canvas, it's a jigsaw puzzle where all these pieces are interconnected. But the questions I ask is, who is your customer? How are they currently growing mushrooms today? And what's broken with that way? So is it working well enough? And if it's working well enough, then they don't need to switch. But if it's not working well enough, and if there are certain mushrooms where it's harder to grow, that's where I would really start. So even like when we looked at Facebook didn't launch in campuses where there was no social network. They actually went into places where there was already a competitor, and their mission was to cause a switch. They were trying to get people to leave the old social network and get on theirs, and that's for everyone. Your early adopters are people who are already using an existing alternative. So that's why that box is so important, to understand who your early adopters are. So they're already using something, but you can do better, and they will see that. If someone who has never grown mushrooms before will theoretically maybe believe you, but they're not going to really know unless they try to grow it.
Okay, cool. And then just a final question. How would you go about like finding a market size for something that is so like behind the scenes, you know? There's no official documentation really about the numbers for.
What's the market size for Uber before Uber launched?
Yeah. What do you think? So it's again, it's the size of your existing alternatives. Like, what is the mushroom industry?
But it wasn't. But for Uber, it kind of wasn't, right?
For Uber, sorry.
Well, but for Uber, like Uber didn't go like most people would call the existing alternatives as taxis. And I guess you had to think about the alternatives in a much broader way to realize that the Uber market was much bigger than the taxi market.
Yes.
Whereas a lot of people went into it thinking it was a subset of the taxi market.
Yeah. But even if you started there, and that's the thing when we get into sizing, is that when we look at investing, there is stage-based kind of approaches to it. So your story may evolve over time. If you look at Shopify, they start in one place, which is just how they build great online stores, then they start doing fulfillment, and now they're almost as big as, as big as Amazon, but they're kind of billion-dollar company as well. Uber, kind of same thing. It was two founders in Paris couldn't get a taxi. They're like, it would be cool if we could just use a phone to get a taxi. And that's just how the idea started. And they start thinking, your private limo, maybe the taxis. And so you can read the founders' minds, but you want to ask yourself, in the original version of the story, the Act 1, is this a big enough problem that would satisfy kind of your ambition? Would it be enough to like do something here? Like if you were even just going in, if all the mushrooms could be grown except one, would being able to grow that mushroom be interesting enough? And if the answer is no, then you start questioning the size of the market and can you approach in other spaces. The reason I bring that up is that all ideas can evolve. And so even when you look at Uber's landing pages, you can go back as a way back time machine. In the beginning, it was just your private limo. Like it was really the black cab alternative, not even the taxi alternative. A few, like 6 months later, it became, we're now like the taxi, and then it became like transportation, the freedom to move around the city and like not having to buy a car. Right? When you start going to that level, it's thinking much bigger than what Uber's original vision was.
Okay, so just approach that from a standpoint of knowing that it's going to be evolving over time, and my understanding of the market size will change as I go through this process.
So it will change as you go through this process, but if you are, it also comes down to your goals. Like, you have to ask yourself, what is it that you want out of this? So you are thinking a few steps ahead, but you want to make sure that in my books I talk about this concept of the minimum success criteria. So when I pursue a new project today, I want, like writing a book or doing anything else, I want to ask myself, will it be worthwhile? Like, what is the floor that is going to make this worthwhile? If I'm going to spend 2-3 years of my life, is this going to be worthwhile? And what is the minimum success criteria? And then what's the maximum upside? And kind of the distance between those two is how you personally chart the course in the earliest stages of a project. And as you get more information, you can adjust and refine along the way.
Cool, okay, thanks so much.
At home cell banking options. Anyone recognize this one?
So my name is Sani. I'm a biomedical engineering student here at UT. So just a little bit of background about my canvas. So I'm really passionate about diagnostics and like any settings, whether that be in developing nations or anywhere else. And the problem that I kind of highlighted here is that there's no kind of solution for banking your own cells. And the reason why that's an important issue is because it's a hot topic in biotech right now about stem cell and stem cell therapy for diagnosis of many different diseases, so like cancer, cardiology related diseases and other diseases. So there's companies out there that focus on diagnostics, like Everlywell, which is an Austin-based company, 23andMe, Quest Diagnostics, but that's much of the testing that happens in the present rather than looking at the long term. So that's kind of the origin of this idea. And kind of the high level concept that I have for this is I said Airbnb for biological molecules or like any biological substance. And the reason why I said Airbnb is because basically finding a home for your biological sample, right? And kind of the idea, I wrote this originally thinking that, you know, a customer could, you know, kind of store their own kind of cells at home. But then when I thought about this, I was like, no person would want to have blood or urine just in their home sitting there, right? So what I envisioned, when I thought of a new model, I thought that maybe this could be implemented in large hospitals and clinics or pathology labs where customers can be given an option during their clinical visit, like, hey, at additional cost, they can save their cells for much longer term use. So that's kind of the broad big picture.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I guess 2 points that maybe come to mind. One is that yes, I mean, the home storage is hard enough to store just wine and not have it go bad in your house, much less stem cells. So I think you want, like, I feel a lot safer if professionals were doing it. So like that's the first one. And then the second one is the existing alternatives. Maybe Lifebank USA, we can talk about that a bit, but many of the others, as you described, 23andMe are more, they get a sample, they then give you the results, and then your sample is gone. So they're not really storage solutions. And so I would actually eliminate them from there. And the question here is, when the job to be done is, I want to store my stem cells because I want to have this future optionality down the road, where do I go? So is that Lifebank USA? Is that
Yeah, so the first couple that I mentioned, that's like the Ancestry and 23andMe, that's like the current one that you're saying. And then the ones on the bottom are existing ones that I did some research on that exist for banking, but they're very, very costly for the customer. So what the solution for that is, compared to competitors, is, you know, there's 2 aspects. One is that the cost, right, cutting down the cost for anybody to do that, because right now, from what I've gathered through research, you basically have to be at part of like a company or like a large corporation for you to have that some sort of service related to that. So this could be targeted for every normal consumer. And secondly, introducing like an app portion of it. So having an option where you can digitally see the progress of your cells through many years, and kind of it gave you feedback on okay, you know, you have this existing health problem or this based on your patient record, it can be used for this application. So that's kind of and obviously the health privacy thing that we obviously secure through the app and everything, right? So that introducing the digital aspect of it, and at a cheaper cost, that would be kind of the uniqueness of the product.
Okay. So in any idea, I always try to get, and you probably see the pattern is I'm trying to understand what are people trying to do, what are the current options, and then what's broken with them. So here there's a cost factor, and then there's the fact that probably no one is doing this like as much as you envision them doing it. And then that begs the next question, which is the awareness, which is are people aware that this is important, right? So 23andMe, even though they started with that, it was more of a it was more of a curiosity, which is send a saliva sample and see what you have. So the whole idea of like storing your stem cells, like have you done any research? See, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt you, but just to add on that, I know in terms of awareness, I don't think there's much awareness on this. My dad sort of works in this space. He always advocates for pregnant couples to, when you give birth, the umbilical cord has it's rich of stem cells. So you tell the doctor, hey, I want to keep this just in case my kid gets some sort of like blood disease, blood cancer, so then we can use those stem cells as a transplant we can cure or she can cure herself. So I know that's like something in the market right now.
Yeah, and I would say like that can be an existing alternative to study and an early adopter segment to study to see like are the people who are opting in for that, like what's their motivation? Is that growing? Is that shrinking? So that's like when we talk about market sizing, some of it is doing that kind of research to see are people currently like storing stem cells or trying to preserve stem cells, and there are pockets of people, and is that like the awareness thing may be the bigger, I would say, risk or challenge here, and that may be part of what you start building first, which is getting people to be aware that this is worth doing in the first place, and then the second act of the story is we also have a place to store this.
Yeah, I have 3 kids, and we did the stem cell storage thing. That was an option that was effectively promoted by the hospital, kind of marketed. And I think it's a really good example of there might be other life events or opportunities that are the right times to market this or get this in front of people. But there are a lot of things where the most effective form of marketing is around timing, around something happening. So for example, someone having a baby, they need a whole bunch of things, and they're going to be thinking about a whole bunch of things. Someone getting married is another example of that causes a whole bunch of things. Someone buying a new home, someone registering a domain name, which means often founding a business. Like these are like triggers that make them really good prospects for a lot of other things. Someone having a baby is a really good time when they're probably going to be thinking about this and care about it enough to think about, putting the value on banking it. Whereas it's just much harder to get, I would imagine, much harder to get people's attention any other time. So, but that might be your trick, is figuring out, and here's another time when, if you're diagnosed with this issue, if this happens, if whatever, you would want to market that. But I think that's just a really good example of that. Is the reason why that works so well at that time is timing. It's like something everyone's thinking about, and ready to go deal with.
Yeah, and speaking of triggering events, like that's another concept that you all want to think about with your early adopters, because your early adopters don't just wake up one day, like I was giving the car example, and say I need a new car. Something usually happens, like I moved to a new city, now distances are longer, I need a car to move around. Or my old car is acting up and I need a new car. But there's going to be these changes in circumstance that's going to cause people to want to do things. And so I don't wake up one day and say I need to get my stem cells frozen. But as Josh was saying, there are going to be these life cycle events. People get diagnosed, people get, have life, new babies and things, and then they start thinking about those future proofing things. So I go into all those places and see where is that currently happening, and those would be good candidates to interview to see if the existing process for doing that, if it's so complicated and expensive, then you can enter in those spaces and win those customers to start with.
And also, I think this canvas specifically focuses on curing yourself through your own stem cells. But for example, Ash, if you had some sort of blood cancer, there is like maybe a 1 or 1,000 chance that my stem cells could also cure you as well, right? Because we're of the same ethnicity for the HLA type match. So maybe that's something else that could be looked into as well. You're using your stem cells, preserving your stem cells for helping people of your own like ethnic background.
Sure.
Yeah.
I think that's where the Airbnb concept came from, or was it maybe something different? But I would say that yes, I mean, I can see that as maybe being, and this is where like you have to first start with where people are, and so that may be part of the story, but it could also be that initially it's just preserving your own stem cells, and maybe there's an act two. So even 23andMe, like they started off with, just get your ancestry stuff, and now they're doing all this research, and there's like an act two story. So there can be an evolution of the UDP, whether that's what you lead with or what comes second, like that can be what you do in your discovery.
Great, thanks.
Sure. Increased revenue and better brand reputation.
Wasting ad spend. Emphasis.
No, I think it's fine. So let's be sure. Thank you. I will tell you a little bit about it. And so kind of the way that I see myself is that I look at myself as an idea guy, and basically I wanted to figure out a way to monetize that, whether that's through like a very custom and bespoke lead generation agency, or just like by doing paid ads, SEO, and other types of outreach in a much more bespoke and value first type approach, right? A la like kind of similar to like how Alex Hormozy kind of preaches in his content and stuff like that, right? And so kind of what I'm trying to do is build out potentially like a lead generation agency that employs AI and in a way that it consults very specific solutions for companies, integrating one current business principles like very tried and tested paid ads, SEO, lead generation, lead magnet, stuff like that, and combining that with AI into either some sort of bespoke consulting model or within a platform like a SaaS type thing. And so kind of what I want to do is just build those two out together, and what I'm confused in is how exactly to find product market fit for that and differentiate yourself among like a sea of other lead gen, other paid ads, other types of like all-in-one marketing agencies. I want to know how to be better and be the person that companies go to.
Okay. So the first question is existing alternative box blank. Maybe talk about why you left that one blank.
Which box? Sorry.
Existing alternative.
Sure. I think the main existing alternative is like literally any other lead generation agency or paid ads agency, right? And so my biggest thing is how do I differentiate and get a really strong competitive advantage against those two, because one thing that I see in service businesses is you can differentiate in a couple ways. First is you give them more. Second is you are better and you give them like much more outsized returns compared to others. And so those are the two ways that I see. And what I'm not sure is if there's a third, fourth, fifth way to do that same differentiation, or would you be boxed into I need to do more or I need to do more and better, something like that.
Right. But the reason why I kind of picked up on that is because like as you're describing it, there is an existing alternative, and that's actually what you want to put there. If you were approaching the company, you would say the old way of doing marketing advertising is just go hire an agency, do all these things, and here's what's wrong with that. So you want to talk about the poor results or costs or things, and so that's what makes the canvas, like in a story form, you go to a customer and say, when you want to run a new ad campaign, you go hire, depending on your budget, this company, but here's all the issues with it. We have a better, and then whatever the value proposition is. So whether it's cost effectiveness or it's more, more A/B testing or like whatever it is, but that's where like you want to win that customer, and that's how I would recommend thinking about where that differentiation comes from. And I know it's early stages, but this is also where the discovery process is that helps, is going and talking to people who have ever run an ad campaign and just interviewing them, not surveys, but interviewing them and asking them what they did. So who they hired, how that project went, was the job done, was it not done, were they satisfied, not satisfied at the end of the day. And you may hear things like, well, it was so costly, but at the end, we just got a new logo and it like did nothing to our metrics. Right? So when you hear stories like that, that's where you can go back to them and say, we can guarantee results because we're going to give you not just one version, but 10 versions. We're going to test it, and we're going to make sure that you have a lift. So that's where you can go in and create a real compelling offer while the competitors cannot do it.
Absolutely. I think my just one question about that, right, is stuff like that like enough? Because it feels like it, at least just to me, right? Maybe it's like a limiting belief. It just feels like that's not good enough for me, right? It's like I want to be better in every possible way, but also offer a very unique selling proposition on top of that, right? And what I'm confused about is that is being that person that delivers results and is cost effective and just does better overall delivery, is that enough to sustain in the long term, or is that, or does it need to have like more as you go forward?
Yeah. So it's something you have to gauge along the way. So I would say that from the innovator, from the entrepreneur perspective, we sometimes get too idealistic. We try to think of the most perfect possible solution. We imagine, like you just described, everything, all problems solved, everything working. The challenge is that getting there is complex. Like you have to build a lot more to get there, when the customer would have said fine and hello. Right? So if they are really in the weeds, the art of figuring out the minimum viable product, which is the first release, is making sure you can promise enough of value proposition that causes them to switch. So if they fire their agency and say they'll hire you instead, whatever the smallest thing that you can promise them to make that happen, that's the initial thing you want to be aiming for. Not because you are not being ambitious, you can do the other things over time, but if you sometimes even promise too many things, you confuse the customer and they get overwhelmed, they don't even believe you. If someone came and said, I can 100x my marketing, I'll just say, I'm not going to talk to you. They don't believe you, right? So that's where there's also a gap that you see where you have to meet the customer where they are, and you have to promise, what I aim for is a 3x to 10x better, right? And that can be even emotional. So if they're spending money, how much money are they spending? You don't have to be 1/10 the cost, but if you can produce results that are better than what they have, then you get a lift there. If it's easier to work with you than the people they work with, you get an emotional lift there. So we're aiming for like 3x to 10x better, and that's what you should be aiming for. Even though in your mind you might want to be doing 100x better, start with 3 to 10x, and that's enough to get people excited.
Absolutely. I really appreciate that. And I guess I just have like one question on top of that, right? So it's something I struggle with where I try to bundle too many things together into one offer, right? So there's this whole lead gen ads, and my main thing is that I don't know, it's something weird. When I start working with a company and get really like down in the deep of understanding their processes, operations, how it works, I just start getting tons and tons of ideas for how to make it better in a way like a real consulting firm would do, right? And that's kind of like my favorite thing to do, is just look at companies, see where their bottlenecks are, where they can increase efficiency, where they can be better even though they're already good. And so my question is, how would I integrate that existing like very natural skill into kind of these very hard skills of here's paid ads, here's doing all this outreach, here's making new revenue just through specifically marketing and advertising? How do I bundle that with, I have a pretty good like business understanding, but then again I don't have 20 years of experience, so how do I put those two together and make it something that customers will want to trust and work with?
Yeah, so is that something you're already doing for clients, where you're looking at their marketing and making it better?
So I'm doing it with one client right now. They're based out of New York, and so kind of what I'm doing is looking at their really big sales funnels and operations processes, see how they're where they're going. Like for example, they're booking a lot of calls, but then their follow-up systems really aren't working at all, so they're just losing tons of leads in the process of getting to the call. And they have these like webinars that they do every month, and I've been working with them to create a bunch of like assets they can send specifically to leads along with a bunch of lead magnet stuff, right? And so stuff like that is really enjoyable to me in terms of figuring out where a company can go direction-wise, very technically and specifically. And so I don't know how to put the two together, even though I'm doing the two of them separately from multiple people.
And the reason I ask that question is that is actually the ideal way to build your first automated process. The way I hear you describe it is that your clients have a problem, they're hiring you as a consultant to solve it, and the challenge with that is that you can only work with so many consultants, it's not very scalable. And so if there is a big enough problem there where it isn't just one person hiring you, but you could take 10, 20, 30 more clients, automating that using your solution is a good internal next step to take, and that's how you increase your scalability and productize what it is that you have. You're also listening to the customer's needs and building a product in response to that demand versus imagining something new that your customers would want and having to go pitch it to them. So concierge, this is like the concierge MVP pattern. So we always recommend this, where if you're building something complex, you can be a consultant first, deliver value, and as you are learning, your job becomes how do you fire yourself as the solution and replace yourself with something more automated, which is where the product comes in.
Absolutely. So like systemizing the processes and just like selling the system, the outcome from that, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's
And,
really
and then even there, like when you said you want to do, like, so there's so many different problems or spaces you can go. I would first start as a consultant and see, can you land clients based on different value propositions? Like I'll help you with, you know, your meeting assets, or I'll help you with this or the other, and see where the demand is. Like where are people really struggling? And I would look to use services as a way, because companies love to hire people. They're really more reluctant to hire software. They don't know if it's going to work or not, especially when you start. Everyone's using AI these days in marketing, and so what's different about yours versus the other? They'll have to do a lot more due diligence. But if you're already getting clients, I would start there and then figure out how do you automate and scale that versus the alternative.
Absolutely. I guess just one question, just as like a last follow-up, right? With the consulting offer, right? How would you go about pitching that to a very, very cold audience, right? Where it's like, okay, cool. I'm 19. I've done like a little bit of business experience. I know like maybe a little bit, but nowhere near you guys. But I think I can solve your problems. So how would you go about positioning that offer in like an in-person or just a call setting or something like that, right? How would you make someone trust you, given a lack of experience?
Well, so the first thing is you have some clients, so maybe ask for referrals there.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, the results speak louder than anything else. You can start to show you had a client and you have to obviously start marketing yourself.
Yeah.
The other bit over there is, you know, and this is what a lot of people do in kind of the early stages, is just email people and be helpful, be valuable. You can give them something that is something they have not done before, or challenge their marketing, or show them how they can do something. They may want to engage you, they may want to work with you. So that's more on the services side, is how do you get out there. But I would still think that services are easier to sell than a product, because a product requires there to be just a lot more self-serve, basically has to work on its own. So I would really start with focusing on how do you get more clients, and then from there start automating some of the big vision that you have, versus go the product route and build a very elaborate platform which, you know, has different challenges in terms of adoption.
Absolutely.
Next week I'm going to tell the story of starting my first company when I was in college, and it started as a consulting company where I was doing a bunch of consulting work, and then eventually that product, the consulting, turned into, showed me some problems that he said, wow, would you rather just pay me to host this for you? And so it turned into a product, into a hosting business. But the way that and we'll talk more about this next time, but just to tie them together next time, the main way I marketed myself as a 19-year-old college student in my dorm room, trying to go get people to pay me to, you know, fix their software or write software for them, was to go out on the equivalent of what today would be social media, on bulletin boards and news groups and things like that. But I used to go out on social media and answer all the easy questions for free. And I would just be like out there answering everybody, and that got everybody's attention. And when you know what happens when you answer people's questions, they ask you more questions, right? And so like then it gets like they start asking more and more questions, and then I could get to a point where I built some trust with them. I answered a bunch of their questions, and I could say, hey, that thing you just asked me, that's going to take me a couple of hours to actually do. Here's my rate. It's a reasonable rate. Like, would you pay me to do it? And that was a really effective way for me to go get initial customers.
I really appreciate that. I think that's basically that's exactly the route that I'm trying to take, right? I'm going to like networking events and offering like basically just free value as much as I can, where it's like, here, let me look at your company, see if I can make any difference and any value, and just do that. So
But like another way of even like the customer research side is like, and I haven't done a lot of this, but I've done this before, like you can search Twitter and other social media platforms. Can you find people asking the questions that you can answer?
Absolutely.
Like, are they out there asking those questions? And can you just, again, then can you just answer them? Like, you're not scamming them if you're answering the question they asked in like a helpful way, right? And again, you don't kind of lead with the now hire me, but you just do that a bunch, and then people will start offering to hire you.
100%. Okay, that's a very good reassurance. I'm going the same route of like giving as much as I can, and hopefully eventually receiving a couple of referrals and see where we can go from there. So that's a very good reassurance to give. Thank you so much, Josh. And thank you so much, Ash. I really appreciate your advice and everything I've learned.
Are we technically have till 6, I don't know how many more campuses we have.
This is either the last one or the
This is a good one we can read. Big text.
Yeah, we want to not putting into action audience influence product. And it's a very early canvas.
So do we know whose this is?
I'm not sure. Oh, there's a name. Karina White.
What? Oh, is that you? Alright. Double check. Okay.
Hello, my name is Karina, and I didn't really fill out the whole thing as I'm still working on it and just like pretty new to it, so I just put down general information, and I'll just like to hear back. And
Yeah, so again, like everyone else, just give us the backstory, like where did this idea come from and what are you thinking?
so this is general. I don't really have a foundational idea. Yes, I'm just in a mess right now between different things, such as a possible app to text hookups.
So is this, so if I understand like who the person is this somebody like an entrepreneur who has
Yes.
an idea and the problem is not putting it into action?
Yeah.
Funding revenue, like is that?
Andy's pretty high level still.
Yeah. So,
Yes, very much.
sure. So if you want to work on it some more, maybe in subsequent classes we can.
Yeah.
Yeah, that'll be great.
Yeah, it's good to get started on just, and a lot of times if you're not sure where to start filling in the blanks, right?
Yeah.
Is there one more? Sorry, this was random. I didn't mean to- That was random.
Okay. Yes, question? Go ahead.
You said, you talked a lot about like old versus new. When did that switch occur, and when do you think the next switch is gonna occur, and like what sort of mind shift change will happen then?
So are you talking about like the old versus new in terms of how we build products?
Yeah, you talked about like old world versus new world.
Yeah.
So like, when do you think that like shift happened, right?
Like when it actually occurred?
Yeah, when it became smarter to build.
Yeah.
This.
So I mean, it's never it's never a binary switch. It's always a continuous process. So even when we look at so if you look at any way product methodology from waterfall to agile and then to lean, it's a continuous process, but they're going to be early adopters. So if we go back as early as 1994, you look at companies like Amazon starting to launch and being very data centric, being very customer centric, and you can almost say some of these ideas were aligned with the way they were doing this back then. You look at Facebook in 2004, they're very much around experimentation and looking at data and metrics, and they get easier to start measuring things. So those are all like some of the early signs of the triggering event. And then in 2009, like, you know, another decade later, this is where Eric Ries and a few other people started codifying what had been happening into the lean startup. So talking about the importance of metrics, of customer centricity. And so the methodology and the codification always happens post companies starting to do it. But that would be how I would read it. And so I would almost say that once the internet, I look at the internet, open source, cloud computing. Like once those three things became accessible, it became easier for anyone at home to start writing code, building products, and that was the beginning of that switch. Today we're seeing AI, and there's a lot of promise there, and a lot of people are saying this is going to revolutionize the way we again build products or think about value. And so this could be again the early beginnings of the next kind of wave or the next switch.
I was actually wondering if I could share about my campus. I emailed it like a week ago, so you might have missed it. That's why. But I was wondering if I could still share.
But if you want to talk to it, that's fine. So the backstory is fine.
Yeah, just do the backstory and make that for the last one.
Yep, sure. So at my high school, there was a pretty big lack of student parking. The school just didn't allot very many spaces to that because it's a suburban area. They also couldn't build a parking garage for it. So on a private basis, what was happening was that a lot of parents especially, but students too, were going around the neighborhood and going to homeowners and saying, hey, could my student park in your driveway and we'll pay you per semester for the year or whatever. So that was something that we noticed, and we said, hey, we can make a market out of this and capitalize on it. So we created, initially, our idea was we could work with homeowners directly and offer them an easy way. We're connecting the homeowners and the students instead of the students having to go to the homeowners, and it creates an ease for them. For us, the biggest thing was to make sure that we're getting the right market value. We also did an auction system. So for our first year, we built an auction system through Google Docs just for our school, and it was alright. It was really a very, very early stage kind of MVP. And then this year we worked with a web developer to build out a custom auction system through WordPress, if you're familiar with that. But we really what ended up happening is, so we were again successful at our own school. We doubled our revenue, and then we expanded to one other school semi-successfully. But the main issue that we had was that when we tried to hit these other markets, we tried to expand to, I think, 3 other schools. What ended up happening is that we just flat out failed. I mean, we got the homeowners. We didn't have a problem with that. That wasn't the issue. I think we got maybe 12 spots or so per school, which is fine for the first year. But the main issue was that when we tried to drive traffic to the site, we tried to get people interested on the student side, we just weren't able to do it because we didn't have the connections. At our own school, like we had our family members or friends that were in the Facebook groups, and we had these connections through Snapchat and Instagram and our own pages that people would follow. And it was just at these other schools we didn't have these connections. So I was wondering if you had any advice on how to kind of crack into those new markets.
So was there still a parking problem in those?
New schools, yes. We identified there was a parking problem at all these schools.
Okay. So I mean, it's more of a market. So I guess the good news is that there is a problem to solve, which is the marketing awareness problem. So at least you know what it is you should be focused on. And that's, so even when we look at like Facebook's expansion, one of the things when they were pitching their money, when they were raising their money, they were able to pitch was that we have built some systems. Like when they would go into a new college campus, they would take all the classes and students that were going to be in it and build groups and social networks so that it was easier, so reducing friction. And that would be the equivalent of what your task is. So what you have done worked in your school because it was friendly and you had kind of a network there to make happen. You have to figure out I don't have the magic answer, but you have to figure out like what is the process to go into a new school and see that. So maybe it's finding the influencer moms. So again, look at what worked in your neighborhood. Like you said, you went to the parents and they got the word out. Can you, instead of pitching this homeowners, go and find those influencer parents and get them to get the word out, or like whoever it is. So what worked in your school, you want to try to replicate there. It's going to be a bit more work, but if you can crack it with that first school, the second, third, fourth become easier from then on out.
And anytime you're doing something that's a multi-city or multi-school or multi-place model, proving the second and the third one is really important. Like, the first one's good. It's like, look, we got something to work. But like, it's like, look, and we could do it again and again, that like, it really starts to make it real. So, because that's a lot harder. A lot of times it's easier to get that first one because you have all these advantages.
Yeah.
And it's the same with even like if you launch a product and you get your friends to use it, like that's the easy win. And you want to start there. But then when you start getting to strangers, like someone asked, that's when the real test happens. Can you get strangers to kind of get the value? So it's not like I said, there's no silver bullet answer, but that is, like, it's good that you know what the problem is, but that's what I would home in on, is try to figure out how can you systematize that where it becomes repeatable. And once you have that, then you can go to an investor and say, look, we do this 3 times, and each time we were able to get double our revenue, or how you describe it, and that becomes very compelling.
Thank you. Well, what we were thinking of doing, not to trail on too long, I'll leave it here after this, but what we were thinking of doing was reaching out to students at these schools who are especially ambitious and saying, look, we'll give you X% cut of all revenue at this school for the first year if you are able to market this and make this a thing at your school. So that was just kind of a thought that I had. But
So again, this is where when you have a problem, you can come up with many ideas. I came up with the influencer mom, coming up with an incentivized referral program for students. You can come up with if you ask people here, once you put a problem like that, people will come up with all kinds of ideas, some really wild and crazy, some maybe you want to do. But that's the whole thing. That's the risky assumption testing. You know what the risk is, start testing. and the one that works double down on that one.
Thank you very much, Ash.
Awesome. Well, let's give a big round of applause for Ash.
Well done. I hope you find that helpful, and I really hope you all make it all the way through his book. It's really actionable. It really gives you really specific advice about how to do things with your startup and how to test your ideas that I think make it stand out from a lot of other books. And so, next week, I'm going to be talking. It's the 1 week where I get up and talk. And then the rest of the time, it's always me doing a fireside chat with someone else, and you can ask them questions. These are, again, these first classes are a little bit unusual. But on this one, I'm going to give a talk about me telling my story and about starting my company when I was in college, when I was in some of your shoes. And kind of like my thinking back, like if I was going to give any of my advice to one of you, to someone trying to start a company while you're in school, what would I give? And here's the cheat sheet. Here's what it is. It's become an expert at something you're passionate about. We heard a lot of people talking about things that they seem to think they knew a lot about or were passionate about today. Meet someone new every day. Meet a lot of people. And you have to work your ass off. It takes a lot of work. So we'll talk about those three things. But that's what next week's going to be. And then, as you saw earlier today, we've got a great lineup coming, and we'll tell you more about some of those people that are coming out. So, thanks very much, and we will see you next week. Oh, one more. Is there an attendance slide? Last thing, attendance slide. So there's the test at the beginning, attendance slide at the end. Click that, and then you're out of here. Thanks.
Oh, there's parking validation right here. Sell
like what year? I texted my email too. My passport.
Okay, I'll check my phone.
Yeah, I figured when.
Was it during class?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, I figured. No worries.
This probably went. No?
Oh!
Math. Okay. I also have unit this year.
I figured. I saw that. I was like.
I learned my lesson in the lab. Like show
Yeah, I don't know. No worries.
Was your math the one that was plugged in?
most of the time.
Okay, so I was worried when I was have the chart. I was like, my name popped up. I'm going to tell my children.
No, I took care of that. Never hit no.
You're gonna fight me. I was debating. I figured you were going to.
Although I wouldn't have no,
yeah, well, I didn't want to fucking annoy so.
yeah, I wouldn't have
I've learned over the years not
Yeah, I might talk to some of those competitions.
Yeah, can I see what percentage?
Yeah.
Last thing, I totally forgot to because they also post that just like viral as a documentary that might be a very like upstream stuff. I was gonna say Andre and I'll drive for but yeah, awesome. Then I will. I'll probably just like but I'll be on my diet.
Myself as a singer, I want to take that class.
So the first is we have more control that always happens. Especially when we're on or we see a problem and it's maybe not trying to fix it or problem, but just trying to solve it. So that's just the way we wire it. At the same time, the difference could still be wrong, so that people market size. Many problems are looking one way. Second that's what I'm
Good campuses.
I'm actually going to speak to him.
It's a good, but one of the testing of it, but when you have to like a full fashion show, so this is where it's always like I don't know, like 20 minutes to work here, and you go to their origin story. So I always like to use figure out my own blog, because we don't know anything about their founding story and how she got started. Like I guarantee that they started fashion show. It probably started with more grassroots kind of thing. So understand what they did, study it, learn it, and then take some of the ideas and test them. Oh, well, but this is what I'm saying. The initial project is trying to build is what I call minimum viable product. So you want to find, let's just say we're doing that. You want to find men and women who would be interested in the idea of more diverse, makeup products. And so you don't have to do it. You don't have to do any of that stuff. You're just going with those campaigns and saying, this is what beauty looks like. You say if you're interested in watching soon, put it in your hairline first. All of that. So I don't know.
We want to share that with us as well.
So you're building an audience.
Not like this, not like
People are we just want to use that as a means for attraction.
I'm trying so hard to build social media.
Yeah, so it could be social media active. So I'm just giving you guys right. Right. I was able to get 1,000 people interested in buying the book. That's great. So I didn't actually submit to it. Yeah, so that is this idea of track first. So rather than building and making it fresh, you're just saying, here's an idea, if we had or
you'll still see me in the skies.
that'd be a you're building that up. So you have to pick like what is that platform? Social media, email marketing, there's different things. So you have to figure out where to look at now. Share about they work out. That's where you start building. There's times the timing may not be right, like maybe 10 years from now, that won't happen. But there are different times where it changes. And so the way that I describe it is you have to set a minimum success criteria. So give yourself 3 months. And say, 3 months I'm going to run this campaign, I'm going to run this campaign. And in 3 months I would need to see the audience build to at least at least 1,000 people who have said that they're in here, they're interested in this product. And if I don't hit that number, I'm going to be back. So that number is 500. It's close to
It's actually it's called
What is it?
yeah.
The New Zealand pitch? Yeah. Did you register? Yeah. I did? Okay. They're in the middle of the Yeah, they're in Antone, so once you exit 16, turn left. Yeah.
Okay,
so only if you really need
It's gonna do something. Not right now. Yeah. Yeah, I kind of just put up a few flyers here and there.
No, but I know it's like first class.
You go to the VCO restriction. I'm gonna keep putting flyers.
Oh, okay.
Well,
So you thinking of like.
So I would say like that's why I told you at first that entrepreneurship is a tough point. So sometimes it's also not for everyone. So I don't know what is this class, but it's be trying to come up with one ideas
So you
just play with.
Why not?
You're not going to stay and play with fly a lot. Usually it's like 1973 or something like that. Or something like that. I wouldn't get too worked up over the first idea.
Yeah, not bad. I just learned about like what is the next thing that
You download it, please.
It's also private by yourself. Like I've had many ideas.
Yeah.
Started
Sorry.
with even the customer, but I just have to
Oh, yeah, so
those next stations. Because there's no connection. Like I got into like photography, I got into photography, but I work in private photographer. You have to kind of live that world or get it back and do all these things. So when you realize that that's not what you why would you come in?
Yeah,
It's a part of this whole process. Figure out it's like when you go to college, always same thing.
Yeah. Oh, right. This is you can choose if it's mainly green bread.
Yeah, I think LinkedIn is where I just do my posts there.
spaces and all the stuff you have already, and they can combine them with those things.
Yeah, it's called moves, so to figure out what those are. It's hard to do that. And also,
Honestly, not even like maybe like 3 weeks or so. Yeah, because I can't keep impressed with you. You're not back in your heart. I feel stop speaking. I don't know. Every couple of months, I adopt the dual obsession to like. I feel like it's kind of like. No, I really was just answering my good ways of approaching.
But so again, there I would so with all of us, I think ultimately you want to figure out who is the customer in the story. Say practice or students or are you likely to pay for the service?
I think that's unfriendly. So that's what I feel like.
So the advertising model that I was going to say that if you can do the job better, then you might just come and say, hey, if the problem is scope, like if you're going and like changing how they're classes online, that creates too much confusion.
No, I'm not doing that.
Yeah, but no,
I'm
because
doing
it's
stuff optimizing how we use it.
there's no way of saying
AI through
wow, thank you so much for learning
what is the maximum number of minors I can achieve in 7 classes? And I'll say based on the degree, all of these things is like double up. Here's minus
If that's scalable, then I would say that doing something that's advertising based on a lot of service. So and you made the case with the story, even though like they built the story site work, ultimately it's about getting all the students on this platform and using it every semester and every day. So frequent advertising work.
and it was also very simple for other kids because it's the same software you have to adjust classes and stuff. So it's just really confident.
So again, you can get, this is what the easiest pattern, so right, you can get to things that students would search for every day, like as Google or all those search engines. If it was only at the start of the semester, find
No,
an English class, or find housing, which is once I find it, finding something like a book or that's a mix of that. You can do it in those cases.
There's more people.
You want to get company advertising to jump on it. You get enough daily active users.
So my understanding of it is
Doesn't have to be, so this is where like, it's also very intent-based audience. People are looking for
No, that's
advertising side of it is we'll figure that out a bit later. First thing is like, can you get engagement and transaction. So I would focus on some of those jobs to be done in administration or housing. Asking those kind of questions and building So I guess since you launched, like how has been
pointing out new things about it.
Ultimately it comes down to, so this is where, like even today I started sharing with some friends, like, it's always a switching story, like, what are people, like, where are people stay, and what's the reason for them to come here, it's just like, you know, the chapter, like, and the projector, like, if there are two parties, like, why do you think this is like, and it's a bit like that, people can't get two places, what's the value prop of being here versus right, so this is where like I would, this is again where the early adopters can go on platforms, like private devices. So like, you know, master
I think we should head out.
and they were like Substack, they take as opportunities, those were like triggering opportunities, people are angry on Twitter, it creates an opportunity for an asset. Yeah, but you have to do like campaigns now, and people say, come here, and always the challenge with any social platform is
Yeah, I
it's like
already
you
started.
have to take here,
Part of
what's
my
what's going on, like 5 years over time, nobody here. So this again is where people come, the early adopters are, you want to figure out who the early adopters are, but you want to, like all platforms behind the scenes require some level of, what's the word, orchestration, make sure that people are posting regularly, there's like constant stream of traffic. So you have 16 posters, that's going to feel a bit like a ghost town. People come and there's always a creator pyramid, which is, why should I post? Because I'm going to feel like just one person is not going to make a difference. And so you always have that paradox, and that's why seeding the platform becomes sorry, do you still need my help right now?
Just whenever you're done talking.
Okay.
It's okay. It's no rush.
I'll be there in a sec.
I'm just gonna stay down here because there's so much stuff going on. So.
Thank you so much, by the way. I'll be right back. Yes.
Have you did you find our direction with you?
No, I just
You're good?
Yeah.
Have a good one. Well, today, right?
Yeah.
Josh didn't say good.
True.
That's all in.
I have to lose my well.
Why?
I told someone that they were.
You need it to.
He just had a full like compliment.
Thank you. Y'all can get on out. Do y'all want some pizza?
Let's see if there is.
There's like 2 pieces of supreme and cheese and pepperoni.
I just donated to the security guard.
Oh, that's a good idea.
They always say like that.
Wait. Depends on who's over there.
Yeah.
Is any of you guys over there? And he's over there. Cute. His name's Cute. It's like bigger guy.
It's usually the girl.
Stephanie. The Hispanic lady. Yeah. What's her name?
Is she here?
She wasn't earlier. I wish she was. She's my fave. But yeah, I can definitely wait. If y'all want it.
Yeah, we got one more.
Hi.
Hello.
Are you looking for an event?
Yeah.
Which one? Oh, yes. The green.
Yeah,
Great. Yes.
No.
So it's just past the elevator, then it's all the way on your right. You're gonna recover me.
Yeah. It was even more helpful last year. No, I just wanted someone to kind of.
You know, log up there. There's a thing in there.
I just wanted to make sure that it wasn't catastrophic this year.
So we're back to the original rooms.
Yes, it'll be on the 16th floor, so you can follow them. Go to the elevator for 15.
I'll try and get the laptop running and maybe this weekend.
I'm gonna come with you.
But then you're just like,
It's too high, it's not working.
Oh,
it have to be very.
well, that
What he was saying was, you know, be very careful to
That's
build the space
fair.
on Twitter about.
However.
or even Reddit, sort of, Reddit's like lost 20% of the users. Or third-party API.
Yeah, I had some ideas for that. I guess like either be like known as like known hate speech or known as no ban. Yeah, like putting on flyers like I won't ban you. I won't silence you. Dissidents allowed, shit like that.
I mean, do you ever feel like you're giving too much?
It could be said.
Yeah, I mean, I would. It's about like what customers want, right? It's about what they're looking for. People want to have fun with their friends. I'm telling you, I would love a space where I can just like talk around with my friends and say what's coming in shit. But what else do I want? I also want to be noticed by the people around us, right? And I think we talked about this last time too. It's like people have these followings, but they're kind of restricted into like what they can say on Instagram because you can't post unless you're like doing something special. Otherwise, people just get annoyed. And like even on your stories, if you like say something weird, I mean, like dumb, not a great look. We need a platform for people to just like be themselves. And like I said,
So it's again, it's a design of like making it feel you can say like shit.
it's all design. Instagram wants to make people feel like they have to show their best side of themselves. So really what a platform needs is just the ability to let people feel comfortable. Not vulnerable, but like let people feel like they can be themselves. And to be honest, every platform that's like tried to do this so far is missing some aspect. Vlogging, like taking away filters does not solve that problem. I'm gonna be very honest there. Also, I would give them a lot more credibility if they could actually launch it and have some of that data. So I build off them the data.
I actually am focusing heavily on analytics. That's the next, this iteration that I'm pumping out has comments, less bugs. The comments are bugging out. But there's less bugs in other areas, and then there's more analytics, like to try and improve and see what people are doing.
Have you seen logging here at all recently? They seem to just have vanished.
I think they're okay.
By the way, do you wanna go up a floor?
Yeah.
You guys try it over here?
I think so.
They look really good. You guys know what it is?
No, I've seen it once. And there's no way they would lose it.
Yeah, well, once a portfolio company, always a portfolio company, right?